Coming up next, the Bookening reads C.S. Lewis's least popular novel.
Yay.
Yay. Not even going to tell you what it is. Hey! My name is Nathan Robertson. I'm your humble and obedient host. Over there we have Brandon. He's the scholar above reading.
Hey, Nathan. Hey. Where you want me to go for some tunes?
Yeah.
Hey.
Hey.
How are you?
How's it going? Doing all right. Had a good day?
Yeah, it's been great.
No, I was just stating that I had a good day.
Oh, you had a good day.
I know you had a good day just based on your general affect and the dark rain cloud around you, and you're holding your comfort, your blanket, and you kicked Snoopy on the way over here, and you're Linus Van Pelt is what I'm trying to say. Although Linus would never kick Snoopy. Linus was a gentleman.
Linus with a dark side.
Linus with a dark side.
With an edge.
He's Brendan Chastain. He's in a good mood now, though, because we're recording the Bookening.
Yeah.
His favorite thing to do in life.
That's right.
Besides spend time with his family and other things that he enjoys.
That's right.
It's up there.
It's right up there.
Top 5, for sure.
For sure.
Maybe
top 4.
Maybe top 4. All right. What just got axed? What do we know is beneath the Bookening? That's number 5, but still pretty good.
Who knows? There probably never was a number 5.
There wasn't. Fun fact about Reddit, there's only 4 things that he enjoys. Right. And the Bookening is number 4. No wonder you have a dark cloud.
That's right.
Folks, we're just kidding. Brandon's in a good mood. The more I say that, the more likely you'll be to believe it.
That's right.
Because people that are telling the truth repeat the same thing over and over again for emphasis.
That's right.
There's one thing I've noticed about human nature. People say the same thing over and over again because they're comfortable with it and they believe it's true. And I've been playing with the button on the back of my pants and it's about to fall off. I just realized it's the button for the back pocket. I'm going to slide it through the buttonhole and into the pocket.
Success.
Yes, indeed. Need to buy some new pants. In the middle of a weight fluctuation, hard to want to commit to pants. But I really should because I don't have any good pants right now. And the pants that I do have are clownishly oversized at this point, but that's kind of a nice problem to have. I've lost some weight, if anyone was wondering.
You're looking good.
Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah.
You're looking fine yourself.
Thank you.
Acceptable is a word that comes to mind.
Thank you. I'll take it.
I often feel bad about the fact that I have, over the years on the Bookening, made Brandon sound like a fat, ugly person, which isn't true at all, folks. Just for the record, Brandon's a very handsome young man.
Thank you.
Entirely, once again, acceptable. But I like to make jokes at people's expense. It's one of my things. And over the years, I've made them at Brandon's. And if you didn't know better, you might think Brandon was,
I like the fact that people probably think of me as the comic book guy from The Simpsons.
That's always a good person to be compared to. Hey, we haven't even introduced our third person, Brandon.
No, we haven't.
I think we better do it, huh?
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it together.
All right.
Count of 3. 3, 2, 1.
It's the pastor who's a master of reading.
Jacob
Menzel. How are you, Jake?
Hi, guys. I'm doing just fine.
That's good to hear. Did anything happen to you? Interesting this week?
Did anything happen to me interesting this week? Well, the most interesting things that happened this week are things that I am not at liberty to speak about.
Fair enough.
Hey.
Fair enough, Jacob. Secrets upon riddles upon enigmas. the master of mystery himself, and the master who's a pastor of reading. Strike that, reverse it, and you'll have a sentence that makes sense. It's Jacob Menzel.
Sure.
Hey.
He's got the La Croix. Fun fact, there was an episode that came out, a little bonus episode that dropped weeks and weeks ago. Might be the same La Croix. We record these things out of sequence sometimes. If you had any doubt, maybe I'll cut this out. I don't know. Maybe we want to maintain the mystery. I don't know.
Maybe he's still drinking the same La Croix like 3 or 4 weeks later.
I really hate this drink. I've been nursing it for a long, long time. It's like medicine.
It's a medicine. Yes, it's a medicine that helps one get off of the Coca-Cola. Folks, let's do some donor shout-outs. And by folks, I mean Brandon and Jake.
All right.
I think I accidentally closed my donor shout-out list. No, I didn't. Here it is.
They can join us at home.
I think you should, listener, wherever you are. You help us shout out the donors.
And take a video of it and send it to us so we can retweet it put it up on the Twitter.
Yeah. That's a great idea.
We certainly will. Maybe we'll put them all into a collage. Send yourself a video. That would be super fun. I expect at least one person to do that. Preferably a lot more, but I'd like to see at least one. I'm going to be disappointed if there's not at least one.
Yeah, totally do that.
There's some super fan out there whose pretty face we've never seen. Maybe
we'll play it. We'll play it in an episode too. We'll rip the audio out and put it in an episode.
That's a fantastic idea. We'll We'll use it. Send it. Yeah. Help us donor shout out, and we'll actually put it in the donor shout outs.
No, it can't be
not for this episode.
Wait.
The one you're listening to now, we will magically.
Let me explain to you something about the sequential nature of time.
Okay, go ahead. I don't understand because you see, time is fluid for me.
Yeah.
He's in a James Joyce novel.
Yeah.
All right, let's do some donor shout outs. Let's mix it up today. Brandon, why don't you shout out Dr. X?
You mean Professor X?
I'm so sorry. I always want to think that he's in the medical profession, but he's not.
Nope.
He's just he's a scholar.
He's in the professing profession.
He's in the professing profession.
Professor X.
Professor X. Jake, if you would be so kind as to shout out Eric and Catherine, the lovebirds.
Eric and Catherine, the lovebirds.
The lovebirds. Brandon, if you could give us a nice warm shout out for Nathan, not me.
Nathan, not me. Not that Nathan.
He's also not you.
He's also not me. He's also not Jacob.
I've become Jacob.
Yeah, I don't know why we're calling him Jacob today.
Let me explain to you something about the nature of human individual identity.
Yeah? Go ahead. I'm not you.
No, you're not me. I'm not you. You're not Nathan. You're not Nathan, this other Nathan. There can be more than one Nathan, but I'm not the other Nathan. I'm only this Nathan.
I thought I was in a padded cell and you guys were just in my head.
I do like the idea that when people listen, all they hear is just Brandon talking and then long silences.
Oh, Nathan.
Yes, that's most amusing, fellows. Hey, it's one of my personal heroes, Benjamin Tiberius. Wait, yeah, it's you.
Yeah, it's me. Benjamin Tiberius.
Come on down.
Come on down. And we've got Jay and Katie, who are cold and love cheese.
Jay and Katie, who are cold and love cheese.
From Madison, Wisconsin.
From Madison, Wisconsin.
Hence, well, I mean, context clues. Of course, they're from Madison, Wisconsin. They're cold and they like cheese. Yeah. And
Was that the shout out, or am I supposed to try to
You're
top
supposed
that?
to top that.
because you've done that.
Maya! I had nothing. I'm sorry.
It's not like her dad calling her to dinner or something. She just broke.
Maya!
Yeah, I think that's how we gave her the Adrian yell last time.
Maya! I did it, Maya! Well, that was you just locked him outside. She locked you outside of the cave with Dino or whatever. That was a Flintstones
Stella,
yell. Is what I'm trying to say. What about? I just burped. Beth.
Oh boy, Beth.
Yes, my beloved mother, Beth.
Nathan's beloved mother, Beth.
John and Jill, the lovebirds. The other lovebirds.
John and Jill, the other lovebirds.
You even repeated my vocal mess up. Good job.
And Max.
Oh, and Max.
and Max.
And Max. Robert and Rhonda, The lovebirds.
Robert and Rhonda, the lovebirds.
I feel bad for Jay and Katie. They're the only couple that doesn't get the lovebirds app
But
title.
they specifically requested Jay and Katie from Madison, Wisconsin.
That's true. And
we give people what they want.
we give people what they want.
And they are cold and they like cheese.
Yeah, obviously.
Assuming.
That goes without saying.
Cheese curds are delicious.
Cheese curds are delicious. Was there ever any doubt?
No. Especially when that nice squeak they have.
Squeak the cheese curds have.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have our new donor. Brandon, you excited about our new donor?
Oh, yeah, Nathan.
Oh, right. Big donor, welcome.
Hey, big donor.
To the mysterious.
Beautiful.
Who knows? It's
Prestigious.
A lady. The prestigious?
Yeah.
We don't know anything about her. The inscrutable. Jenny Z.
Hey, Jenny Z.
That's your shout out?
Hey, Jenny Z.
Hey, welcome aboard, Jenny Z. We appreciate your support. Thank you, Jenny Z. Have I said we're talking about Till We Have Faces? No, I haven't actually said it because I didn't even say it in the thing that comes before the music or whatever. But boy, are we ever talking about Till We Have Faces today, folks.
Oh, boy, are we.
What's that sound?
Bang, bang, bang.
Bang, bang on the drum.
Well,
Concert here.
yeah, we're getting a little concert.
I'm not doing context today.
Are you not doing context?
I don't have any. Just joking.
You got a mountain of context, Brandon.
Oh, it's not all of this. Some of this is just his list. I just wanted you guys to see how many books this guy wrote.
If you want to see what it's like, what Brandon's context looks like, we've got actually a little video that we already thrown it up behind the paywall.
Yeah.
Yeah, it probably goes up the day that this episode drops. Actually,
Yeah. So if you want an awesome donor shout out, number one,
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
go to patreon.com/thebookening, subscribe at the $10 level. But if you just want to see a video of like Brandon's mountain of well-researched notes and the books that he's brought,
Some books here.
3 of them,
Yeah.
3 books in addition to Till We Have Faces. We're not going to tell you what they are.
Nope.
But if you support us on Patreon, you'll get to see and hear him talk about what goes into the contextual Texan.
That's
Yeah.
right, yeah. A little behind the scenes. You'll get to hear some of our hand wringing about this episode.
Does this mean I can't talk about these books now?
Nah, you can talk about it.
Yeah.
I'll talk around them.
Yeah.
I'll only use their initials.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's right. And then you have to go and support us.
Yeah. I mean,
To find out what they really are.
Yeah.
One of them is kind of an expensive book that you can't find anymore.
There you go.
And was recommended to me by, true story, this book was recommended to me by one of the best teachers I had, B.H. Fairchild at TCU. He taught poetry. Came and it was a rare opportunity. He taught a class on poetry to a group of us. He came through TCU. He was the writer in residence, and he was a Pulitzer Prize winning, not National Book Critics Award winning poet. So it was fun. And he recommended Allegory of Love.
Allegory of Love.
One of his favorite.
Oh, you said it.
Cut that.
No.
He recommended AL.
Sorry, it's in now.
Already
Too
spoiled
bad.
it.
Yep.
AOE.
That one, you get that one for free, kids.
That's a
But the
little
others-
taste of what's behind the paywall.
The others, however, you don't.
Well, folks, this is Contextual Texan. This is part of the program. Brennan, he's from Texas. He provides some much-needed context. And this is a little interesting. This is your first chance to do C.S. Lewis context, Brandon.
That's right.
But you're going up against someone else that did on the Bookening.
That's right.
Actually, a rare non-Brandon context was given.
Might be the only non-branding context.
Yeah, I want to say that.
I think it was.
Probably true. Every once in a while, I'll do
Yeah.
kind of whatever the word is. What's the
I
sports
mean, you guys
word?
are always jumping in to help,
Yeah.
but
If it's something like pulpy or kind of, I might do a little bit. But yeah, the one true blue non-Brandon context was by Pastor Stephen Baker on our previous C.S. Lewis episodes, which you can listen to. It's a fine context in its own
yeah,
right.
you should go back and listen to it.
It's got a lot of interesting information about C.S. Lewis. I encourage you to listen to that, and it'll be interesting to see how Brandon lives up to it. So,
Oh boy, let's do it. Well, you know, we've got our own way that we handle context now. So
that's right.
start off with the bio, then we'll move into some other tidbits of fun info.
Info.
Let's start with the bio. We've talked a lot about C.S. Lewis's position in literary history. So he was born right at the end of the 1800s, 1898, which puts him right there with a lot of the writers we read. Puts him right there actually with the writer we just read, James Joyce. Because James Joyce, as we know, was writing. He published The Dubliners in 1914, when he was in his 20s. C.S. Lewis in 1914 was getting ready to go off to college, or he was just out of his secondary studies at the boys' schools. You can read all about it in Surprised by Joy, getting ready to go to college. So it puts him right there at the turn towards modernism that we've talked quite a bit about in the Bookening, right at the tail end of realism. And we'll get to kind of the way C.S. Lewis relates to all that here in a minute. So he was born in 1898, a lot like Joyce as well. He was born in Ireland. He was an Irishman. He was actually born in Belfast, which for those who listened to the last episode, or last, I guess, would have been the last episode? The episodes on Joyce.
On Joyce. Last month's episodes, yeah.
Talked a lot about the political landscape of Ireland. Mm-hmm. And Belfast was up in Northern Ireland. They can't see my hand motions here. Right. But Northern Ireland, like we talked about in the 1920s, would actually break off and remain with England. And so Southern Ireland would become what we now know as Ireland. And so this put him firmly in the Protestant camp that would have been more British than they were Irish, which is why I think a lot of people think of C.S. Lewis as a British man. We don't really think of C.S. Lewis as being Irish.
Right.
You think of Oxford.
Yeah, you think of the Oxford Don. That's what he's known as. He's the Oxford and Cambridge Don. But he actually was Irish. There's a whole section in Surprised by Joy. I couldn't find my Surprised by Joy, so I couldn't bring that. So that is not one of the three books that's here in front of me. But he has a whole section in Surprised by Joy about his Irish childhood, how he grew up. His father was a solicitor, another name, British name for a lawyer. So his family was fairly wealthy. His grandfather was a Welshman who came over to Ireland. So he actually had Welsh and Irish descent, so he wasn't British at all, which is kind of interesting because, again, I think most people... But he wasn't English.
I don't just
he was British.
I don't just think of him as British. I think of him as quintessentially British.
Yeah.
Like he's a tea drinking.
And by British, I meant English. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
English.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's what my look was about.
Yeah. I mean, because they were all British. This is the British Isles.
Right.
But we think of him as English. He's like Jake said, he's Oxford.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But he's actually Irish, and he has a big section in Surprised by Joy where he talks about his Irish heritage. And this is really important because one thing that C.S. Lewis and I share in common was that as a teenager, he fell in love with W.B. Yeats. He fell in love with W.B. Yeats, and I didn't actually fall... This is interesting. I did not fall in love with W.B. Yeats because of C.S. Lewis. So I actually fell in love with W.B. Yeats because of a friend recommended him to me. This is important to know about C.S. Lewis because a lot of the stuff we talked about with Irishness, with Joyce, the mysticism, so the sort of Celtic weirdness that gets in with the Arthurian legends, the sort of stuff that actually, like the Mabinogion with Welsh traditions that would come into the Arthurian romances, all this stuff that we think of when we think of Irish fairy tales, Irish fairiness, was very influential to C.S. Lewis. And so in Surprised by Joy, he talks a lot about how, as a young boy, he fell in love with Irish culture, he fell in love with the fairy stories, and he fell in love, as he became a youth, with Nordic stories. So the stories of Thor, not like the Thor that we know of,
Right.
but the Thor that would influence the Superman.
Oh.
Wagner.
Yeah.
The guy that Nietzsche actually looked to as the Superman. So his whole Nordic cycle, the Ring trilogy, or not the Lord of the Rings, but the Ring cycle.
Right.
That opera. But what he loved about it was what he called the northernness. This big, mysterious other thing that was bigger than him, more transcendental to him, and sort of almost a mystical experience. So it's really important to understand with C.S. Lewis because when we talked about Chesterton, we talked about how his childhood, the poetry of the countryside, and his English heritage was very important for him getting a sense of place. Well, for C.S. Lewis, his childhood was very influential with him getting a sense of the whole mythic idea of reality, which is important because you tend to see that writers of whatever they experience as a child really shapes their imagination. So with Dickens, he was in a blacking factory, canning factory. He was an orphan, and so obviously he wrote a lot about orphans and the poor in London because that's what he knew. C.S. Lewis, he was Irish. He had this heritage, but he was also a little bit wealthier. And so this all influences the way that he would see the world and be shaped. And so then to just continue, he was in the Church of Ireland as a young boy. Actually, his grandfather was a priest, I believe, in the Church of Ireland. The Church of Ireland was Protestant, was closer to the Anglican tradition than it was Catholic, which again puts him more in that area of the aristocratic Irish that would be more sympathetic to the Queen and English rule, the UK, whatever you call it. Fairly happy childhood. His dad was kind of eccentric and a little bit harsh. His mother died in 1908 at the age of 9. Up until that point, he had been educated at home, fairly rigorous education at home. During this period, he had a dog called Jaxie, which was killed. And apparently this had a big influence on him, and he took on the nickname Jack. So one of my sons is named Jack after the fact that C.S. Lewis was named Jack.
Your son is named after the dog?
Oh, yeah. What? I chose poorly.
Those are some Indiana Jones references for those of you that don't know your pop culture.
Some other things from Surprised by Joy that are just interesting to note about him. As a young kid, he really fell in love with Beatrix Potter. And one of the stories I think I've mentioned this before, but one of the stories he loved from Beatrix Potter was the story of Squirrel Nutkin. And the reason is because it gave you the sense of autumn and the weirdness of the owl and the danger of the owl. And again, that gets to this idea of northernness, this part of nature and reality it's beyond us, that gets into this mystical felt world that imagination can access. And that'll be important because that really shapes who he became, and I think shapes what Till We Have Faces is.
Yeah.
So yeah, with his brother, Warren, I think was his name.
Yeah.
He would tell stories, anthropomorphic stories about animals, and they created a whole little world called Boxen. So as a young child, he was reading and he was writing fairy tales and stories. So from an early age, he was a storyteller. That's what he loved to do. So his life then after his mother died, he went to a series of boarding schools. One of them, the Wynard boarding school, famously, it was a bad school, harsh, and kind of soured him on education for a little while. Then he went to Malvern, where he went to some more prestigious schools. And these schools still today, I actually went to some of their websites. They pride themselves on the fact that C.S. Lewis was among their students. They also, I think that this one here, the one that in his Surprised by Joy he calls Chart. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize it would sound that way. Chartres, Chartres, I guess. It's like La Croix. Mm-hmm. He went there, but they also, I think, they prided themselves on having 5 Nobel laureates who also went there. So it's a big deal, this school. Mm. So the point being, he had a really good, solid education. It was also during this period, however, where there's a weird section in Surprised by Joy. Have either of you guys read it?
Yes.
I haven't, but I know about the section.
There's a weird section. There's a really weird, it's a really weird section in Surprised by Joy where
I had to reread it because he can't possibly be talking about what I think he's talking about. He's talking about it.
He talks about sodomy that happened and the sort of Harvey Weinsteinian power plays that these older boys would have on the younger boys, and he completely blows over it and kind of says it's just something that happened.
Yeah, he's not exactly like if you just asked him point blank, was it good or bad? He'd probably say bad, but he's like, insofar as they were trying to express love with that, it's a really weird section in that book.
I wish I could have reread it before but it was a strange section.
Yes.
And we're going to get to some other strangeness with him later.
Surprised by Joy, by the way, in case you don't know, it's his sort of spiritual autobiography. He talks about his education, his growing up. Mm-hmm. I always thought that it was a book that would culminate with him meeting Joy Davidman, his future wife, but she's not actually in the book. It's just surprised by the joy of God, basically.
Yeah, so the whole idea of northernness and stuff, it actually comes from that book. Mm-hmm. He talks a lot about that. And it's this sense of the other that he experienced as a child. He abandoned now in this period of boarding schools because he became your typical teenage, prideful kid who became an atheist. Mm-hmm. You got to think that some of the stuff that happened sexually influenced that as well, because I don't think he was innocent of anything.
Mm-hmm. It's hard not to read.
It's hard not to imagine that he was. Yeah, it's hard to imagine he wasn't. So, if that's the right way to say it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how else to
it's hard to imagine he wasn't innocent. That's what I mean. Yeah. So anyways, he went to these...
Wait, now you've got me doing the math. It's hard to imagine he wasn't innocent. No.
What, do you think he was or was not innocent?
I think he wasn't innocent.
If it's hard to imagine that he was
innocent. That's right. That's the way.
It's hard to imagine that he wasn't innocent, then it's easy to imagine that he was innocent.
Thank you.
But you're saying...
I'm getting myself all wrapped up into tangles over here with my
language. We won't make a big deal out of that part of the book, but you should know that that's in Surprised by Joy, and it's pretty weird.
Well, then there's also, and we may as well just mention it, there's the weirdness around him and Jane Moore later in his life. Mm-hmm. And so there's just some cloudiness and strangeness to his history that we don't know a whole lot about, and that might be fine. I mean, it's not like we have to drag his laundry out in front of everyone.
Right.
But it's also nothing that he ever appears to have addressed or repented of, if there was something there to repent of.
Yeah.
So it is worth mentioning. So after his stay at the boarding schools, he famously went back home and had a tutorship with William Kirkpatrick, this really brilliant tutor who taught him to love logic, to love reason, to love Greek poetry, to love a lot of the things that C.S. Lewis would then go on to Oxford and really fall in love with and remain a champion of until he died. And so
the story I think he tells in Surprised by Joy, and I'm not going to remember the details, but when he first meets this gentleman, the guy picks him up from the train or something, and they're walking down the street, and C.S. Lewis says something like, "Oh, what a pretty house," or something like that, just making conversation. And the guy's like, "Why do you say that? What constitutes a pretty house?" Just takes him to task, tears him apart, makes him prove his presuppositions, and Lewis just said, like, this guy from that day on, this is the guy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the fox, basically.
That's right. And that was going to be my point.
Right.
Was that so now you see with William Kirkpatrick the sort of combining of the two elements that would eventually make, I think, Till We Have Faces. This C.S. Lewis was at this point Orwell, basically. He believed in philosophy. He believed in reason. He believed that beauty and reason and logic and philosophy could tell you all the truth there was to know about the world. This is who he was as he prepared to go to Oxford in the early 1900s, or late 19-teens, whatever. As a child, he had this strong impulse towards the mythic, towards this other world that was beyond him. And so you have to know right now, I mean, that's who C.S. Lewis was. He had these combating forces within him. He would go on to Oxford. He won a scholarship in 1916. Everybody knows exactly then what happened because it's 1916. He was there for a year. Then he was shipped off to World War I. He was wounded, saw two of his close friends die because a shell exploded, killed them, wounded him. And like everybody else in the modernist era, we talk a lot about how World War I was essential for understanding modernism. He lost all his faith in humanity. He became a pessimist, and he was just disenchanted with life. Exactly like happened with T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot was in those same trenches, really shaped who they were and who they became. So I know I stress it a lot, but really to understand what modernism was and why it became as cold as it did, you have to remember that World War I was really horrible. It was the worst war that humanity had ever experienced. Machines just killing people left and right. Your friends dying in front of you in very horrific ways. And that changes a person. Mm-hmm. And nobody knew it would be that bad. Mm-hmm. So anyways, he goes back then to Oxford and is successful. He takes firsts in almost all his subjects. I think he takes firsts in all his subjects. Takes a first in English. What that meant at the time was you were rated on how well you would do in your final tests at Oxford, and a first was as high as you could get. So he was brilliant. He took firsts in everything, and then was asked, I don't think he ever wrote a PhD. He was asked to be a fellow pretty soon after that, and then taught for 50 some odd, it wasn't 50 years, was it? 30, 40 years. He died in 1963. Yeah. He was teaching around the late 20s, so it would have been a little less than 40 years.
Yeah, he didn't live to be that old, I don't think.
No, he lived to be 63.
Yeah, so if he taught for 50 years, then he would have
taught at 13. When he was 13. Yeah. Nobody said math was my strength. One of the pacts he had with one of his friends, they told each other if they died, they would take care of each other's family. One of his friends, Patty Moore, when he died, C.S. Lewis promised that he would take care of his mother, Jane Moore, who he had been introduced to. She was 45 at the time, and he did. He took care of her. He actually lived with her for a long while, called her his mother. But some people, there's a lot of weirdness around that relationship. One of his close friends, Owen Barfield, who we'll talk about in just a minute, said there was like a 50-50 chance that something sexual was happening between them. Right. And so...
And there again, we're not saying people have to assume the worst, but it's kind of hard not to read between the lines with some of this stuff in Lewis's life.
Yeah, but it is important to know that he tried to protect that side of himself, keep that very secret until later in life when he finally would meet Joy Davidman.
Great Joy Davidman.
She was a poet and a writer, and he met her, fell in love. I think he met her because he was editing one of her books, and they fell in love. Married in 1956, and then she died in 1960 of cancer. And there's a great Anthony Hopkins movie people can go and watch. Shadowlands.
Yeah, I haven't seen that movie for maybe 15,
have you ever seen it?
20 years, but
I've never seen it.
I will have to watch it. I think I actually own a copy.
An empty episode that we need to fill. Maybe we will watch Shadowlands.
It's sentimental and schmaltzy, but it's
not gonna. But
Anthony Hopkins is C.S. Lewis in my mind now.
Yeah. So, and he does a
great job.
Anthony Hopkins. What do you expect?
And so he died in 1963. He has a poet's corner in Westminster Abbey, where Jane Austen and Shakespeare, all those guys are honored. So he definitely became a man of letters in those periods. People know a lot about that. I have a list of all the books he wrote here. There's a lot. Let's just say a lot of fiction, nonfiction that he wrote, a lot of, not as many books of fiction, and some books of poetry. He actually saw himself as a poet first. When he failed at being a poet, he became a fiction writer, but he was a brilliant scholar. I have one of his books of scholarship here, which is famous. Well, actually, two of them, but I can't tell you what they are.
You can give the initials, though.
Yeah, SIMARL and a P to PL.
A P to PL.
A P to PL.
A P to PL, the best thing he ever wrote, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
It's just great.
Highly recommend you going.
There's no reason for you to read PL without reading a P to PL.
Yeah. I'd actually say if you're going to read one of the two, you should probably read a P to PL.
Just read a P to PL.
And not PL.
Don't even read PL.
Sometimes I like PL and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I think PL is overrated.
I think PL might be a little overrated. I like PL, but
we're going to have to do it.
I love a P to PL.
We'll have to do PL and Moby Dick in the same year. That would be crazy.
PL and MD in the same year?
Yeah, that'd be a crazy year. So that's a brief overview of his life. During his period of scholarship, he was writing all his famous fiction. The one we're reading today, Till We Have Faces, at the very end of his career, so we should position the book. And when did this one get published? It was like 1950, late 1950s, right?
Not hard to find out, presumably.
I would have thought that it would be somewhere here, but it doesn't say. Oh, 1954?
1954.
No, that's when he was a fellow until 1954.
Copyright 1956.
Okay, 1956. So he wrote this towards the end of his career. He actually wrote it. Joy Davidman helped write it and influence it. But this was a book in the making since he was an undergraduate. Apparently, he was haunted by the story of Psyche and Cupid because of some of the illogical elements to the story. And he spent the rest of his life trying to figure out how to make that into a book. First, like I said, he was a poet first. He tried to do some versifications of the story. They all failed, but he always wanted to do it through the perspective of the sister, to use her as an element to look at the way we fail in love and then what true love looks like, what actual real love would look like. If first it was going to be called, so when he actually started writing the book, he was going to call it Bareface.
That's right.
But his editor really didn't like the name Bareface. He said it sounded too much like a Western, apparently. And so he finally went with the line that was already in the book and seemed like... when you get to that part of the book, when she says, we'll only get to see the gods, until we have faces, that actually wasn't written as a nod to the title of the book. That inspired him to take that line and make it the title of the book. So he wanted Bareface because it was a nice play on the fact that Orwell had issues with showing her face, and also the fact that she accused the gods of barefaced lying. Just a lot of play on words with bareface, but the editor convinced him, and he went with Till We Have Faces, which I think is probably the better title.
Yeah, good job, editor.
Yeah. So that's the story behind this. If you want to know kind of the story, this is taken from Apuleius's Golden Ass, which is a collection of Greek stories or Roman stories, I guess.
Yes, it's the only ancient Roman novel in Latin to survive in its entirety.
So there we go. So that influenced him. He took that story and he made it into this one. At the end of Till We Have Faces, he has a note. Did your book have it as well? Or do we all have the same one?
Mine did, yeah.
Where he tells you the story, basically, and then tells you some of the changes he made?
Yes.
That's a helpful thing if you want to go and just kind of see the basic ways he changed the story.
Right.
But pretty much it's the same idea. Psyche and Cupid get together. They convince her to take a look at Cupid because he's told her not to. The drop of wax falls on him and wakes him up, and she's banished for a while until she does these series of tasks, and then she is reunited with
But the sister is very much just a stock evil sister character. They're the sisters, in fact. And don't they both end up... I don't think C.S. Lewis tells us this in his afterword, but don't they... I think that what ends up happening is that they both throw themselves off of a cliff to...
Yeah.
Like, the idea, I guess, is that Cupid will catch them or something, and then Cupid's like, nope.
Goodbye. Yeah.
Bye. And
I think that's right, yeah.
So this is very much like Wicked or one of those stupid Gregory Maguire kind of revisionist.
This is much better than Wicked.
Yeah, sure, yeah. But it's in the same vein of let's take a step back, try and apply psychological realism where an old famous story didn't. And
that's right. And
see what happens.
And so, but you can see also where his early love of like the weird Celtic origins of this and pagan ritual mythic traditions, a lot of the stuff that he would have gotten from reading stuff like the Mabinogion, I think that's how you say it, like the source material for the Grail legend and the Arthurian stories, because he loved that sort of stuff. But then also W.B. Yeats, all these Irish people who were dealing with old Irish legends and stories of the Druids and the fairies. Very heavily influential here because it's dark and it's weird when you get the priest of, is it Ungod or whatever her name is?
Ungod,
Yeah. So to bring it all, tie it back to the main points I was making with his childhood biography. With Till We Have Faces, you see Apuleius, which he would have probably read with Kirkpatrick. But then you also see the weird northern strangeness that he fell in love with come into here as well. So then to go back to Surprised by Joy and look at his conversion experience, why he said he was converted in the first place. He said it was because these things, these elements that haunted him as a child came back to him later in life. And he began to realize that those things that haunted him, those things that then he would see in other things. One of the novels he pointed to, do you know what it was? I laughed when I saw it again.
I don't remember.
Because I realized I had forgotten that it was in Surprised by Joy because a friend of mine recommended it to me. Fantastic.
Yeah, that wonderful novel. You can listen to Brandon talk about it in our childhood books, one of those episodes.
Yeah, it was heavily influential for me.
George MacDonald.
It's strange, yeah. I had some of the same experience as C.S. Lewis without having found them through him. But a friend of mine recommended Fantasties. Now I laugh at Fantasties, but C.S. Lewis, I guess, stayed in love with the book.
The entire problem with C.S. Lewis, which we are going to spend the rest of these 2 episodes dealing with, is the fact that he never figured out to laugh at Fantasties.
Yeah, he stayed in love with that book for the rest of his life, and that whole weird mystical element to it. That's kind of what he would point to as what God would use to save him. Until finally he was like riding on a bus or something, and I
want to say it was a motorcycle ride, a famous motorcycle ride.
Yeah.
It was a bicycle ride.
Or something. And he said he was checkmated. Basically, that's the imagery he uses. He said he was a pawn and he was the king, I guess that's the right imagery. And God had checkmated him, and it was over. And he was the most unwilling convert he thinks to have ever been, but he was converted. But it's important, really, really, really important to realize that this whole idea of northern weirdness was influential in C.S. Lewis's conversion. If you want to understand Surprised by Joy, if you want to understand the failure of The Last Battle, all that stuff, you have to understand that he came from that position. So just a few more things then.
Sure.
I don't think we can get away without talking about the Inklings. Because in the Inklings is actually going to get us into the last point I want to make. So Inklings are famous. It was this book club that he was part of. Not necessarily a book club. It was a group of friends who would go to a pub together, and they would talk about the books they were writing. They were all writers, or they would make fun of other writers. So on the Patreon thing, you can hear us read one of the poems.
Indeed you can.
From one of the ladies that they made fun of.
It's absolutely fantastic.
They had a game where they would pass these poems around, and they would try to see who could make it the longest without laughing. And that person would win. I think that...
I was in the video on Patreon. I was totally tuned out until like that caught my ear, and it really tickled me.
And you can hear Jake suddenly burst out with laughter.
Yeah,
he lost
funny.
the game.
It's pretty awful stuff. It's funny.
Now, who were these Inklings?
Well, the two most famous would be C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien. Everybody's dear J.R.R. Tolkien.
John Reynolds, whatever.
J.R.R. Tolkien, we'll just call him Tolkien.
Tolkien for short.
J.R.R. Tolkien was very influential in helping in C.S. Lewis's conversion. Talked to him about fairies and myth and how Christ was the ultimate myth. Fairies.
It's very influential in
I know, and then we say fairies.
His conversion, talking to him about fairies and myths.
It's funny, you got
the 2 favorite tools of the Apostle Paul.
Yeah, it's funny, but that really, you can't underplay the fact that those things were very influential in C.S. Lewis being attracted to Christianity.
Yep.
So Tolkien he was the one who gave C.S. Lewis the idea about Christ being the ultimate myth. If you go and read God in the Docks, he has essays on the fact that Christ is like the myth. He's the myth that all myths, whatever, that all other myths come from. He's the ultimate myth. He's the myth made flesh, the real myth, the actual myth. Stuff like that. So this stuff that would really get C.S. Lewis excited.
Right.
That came from Tolkien. A lot of that came from Tolkien, but it also came from the other guys, the other 2 weirdos who were part of this group. And when I say weirdos, they really were weirdos. I think we've talked about Charles Williams before.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we've ever mentioned Owen Barfield.
I don't think we have.
But man, are these guys pretty strange. So Charles Williams, he was into ideas of like co-inheritance and love, love that was between everything and all nature and all creation and stuff. And so he has a famous book on Beatrice, Dante's love, and how she's a symbol of how real Christian love should look, and how love is what redeems everything and redeems all nature and so he would always be talking in terms of love and love and love and love. And so this just really, C.S. Lewis got really excited by this stuff. I mean, that is Till We Have Faces. It's just love, 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 love,
do, do, do.
love.
That's all you need.
Yeah, that's all you need, apparently.
Yeah.
So, and then you too can be either Cupid or Psyche.
Yeah.
You choose.
Cupid or Psyche, yeah.
I guess he wasn't into gender fluidity.
No, you could just be Psyche. We're all Psyche.
We're all Psyche.
I think
that's right.
We'll find out.
Yeah. I don't know. I still don't understand. But
we're going to figure it out at the end of these episodes.
But yeah, so Charles Williams was heavily influential on C.S. Lewis. He dedicated some of his books to Charles Williams. Charles Williams was a weirdo, though. He wrote a lot of novels. Like, one of his novels is about the Platonic forms. I'm not going to explain the Platonic forms to you because unless you're a nerdy philosopher, you don't need to understand it. But the Platonic forms come down to Earth like aliens, and they're like traipsing about. And that's the story.
It's called
The Place
forms to be.
Yeah, it's called The Place of the Lion.
Novel?
Yeah, that's the novel. It's called The Place of the Lion. It's a weird novel. And there's the other one, like
The Descent into Hell.
The Descent into Hell,
yeah.
Where people are throughout this day, they're either going to heaven or they're going to hell.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one after the other. It's all this weird mysticism and stuff in these novels.
I've not read a lot of Charles Williams. It was my understanding, true or false, that hideous strength in all its weird glory is pretty heavily influenced by him.
Yeah, it reads a lot like a Charles Williams
than
novel.
A lot of his other stories.
Yeah, it reads a lot like a Charles Williams novel. T.S. Eliot called Charles Williams a spiritual whodunit or something like that, basically. So that's Charles Williams for you. But the big influence was this guy named Owen Barfield, who they all looked to as kind of the genius who was the first Inkling and the last Inkling. He was kind of the founder and the father of the Inklings. He wrote a book called Poetic Diction, where he really argued that myth and metaphor were the essential elements of language. And so language worked around myth and metaphor, and that was essential to understanding human language and human identity, and that everything went back to metaphor, and that all language after metaphor was just trying to get back to it. Was just all, and it's as weird as it sounds. It's all mystical and strange. And Owen Barfield got into this thing called anthroposophy, which was a branch of another thing called theosophy, which was started by this mystic in America called Madame Blavatsky. And it's quite a bit like Scientology. It's just weird. And it believed that man could know the spiritual world scientifically, and you could have access to it through your imagination, and that your imagination, through things like metaphor and poetry, could understand the spiritual world. And Owen Barfield was really into this. And Owen Barfield was really influential on C.S. Lewis. So C.S. Lewis, through him, would come into contact with guys like Rudolf Steiner. I don't know if you ever met Rudolf Steiner, but his thinking, which was anthroposophic and moronic. So
moronic.
It was really moronic. It's also, I mean, a short aside, in Surprised by Joy, C.S. Lewis does say he briefly thought about going to the occult and Satanism. Mm-hmm. And so C.S. Lewis was always tempted this way. W.B. Yeats, later in his life, would become a theosophist and was always, like, through automatic writing and stuff like that, trying to get at what spiritualism is. What's the weird Jewish thing? Is it the Kabbalah?
The Kabbalah, yeah.
The Kabbalah is connected to theosophy. Mm-hmm. And so theosophy, the Kabbalah, all this stuff where you think that through weird symbols and mysticism, and it gets really close to things like that Aleister Crowley and the guys that would start the satanic movements would be doing as well. So all this magical occultism stuff would be very tied together, and so that's why it seems kind of nasty and weird, because it was kind of nasty and weird. And Owen Barfield was kind of nasty and weird, and he was very influential in C.S. Lewis's life. Remained so until he died. So they never had a falling out. And so I think this is just, before we get into discussing the book, it's really important for you to realize that C.S. Lewis, he was a great apologist. Mere Christianity's good for the most part. Do you agree? Oh, okay. Yeah, it's fine. Mere Christianity's fine.
It's got some.
What's the really good one?
Stuff.
The one that we would actually recommend. The Abolition of Man.
The Abolition of Man.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
It's a great book. He had all these things. He was the clear reasoner. He was in many ways the fox, but he was the fox who was always fighting this weird pagan poet side of him as well. And the older he got, the more the weird pagan poet began to win. And the Weird Pagan Poet was this Rudolf Steiner anthroposophic stuff that came from Owen Barfield.
When he's just being the fox, though, he's fantastic. Like when he's actually just talking about, I'm going to just give it away, the PL to, what were we saying? The
PL.
The P to PL.
The P to PL is a preface that he wrote to
Paradise Lost.
Paradise Lost. And it's just great. It's just wonderful. I mean, it's enjoyable to read, and it teaches you so much about poetry. I used it a lot when we were talking about Beowulf, believe it or not, because it's just a good primer on what epic poetry is, and it's just it's dense and it can be difficult, but
there's really good stuff in there.
It's good stuff, yeah.
Yeah. So the things that I really wanted to stress were the mythic stuff and what that would lead him to later in life, the kind of friends he had in the Inklings. And then also how that wars with this philosopher rationalist in him. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you see those things, then Till We Have Faces begins to make more sense. Why that was his swan song, basically. Right. So that's all I've got.
Anything you'd like to add?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Me neither. Except for, what's that sound? It's the airplane going over. Indicating baggage check, part of the show where we talk about our baggage. And I'd like to spend a little bit more time maybe today talking about baggage because C.S. Lewis is huge, and I think we all have relationship with him. It's a little bit hard not to if you're an evangelical Christian in the West, probably in the East too, for all I know. But when I grew up, C.S. Lewis was certainly ubiquitous. What's your history with C.S. Lewis, Jake?
Longtime listeners will remember maybe that my first encounter with Lewis would have been around third grade, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
That's right.
And then I read all of Narnia and loved it. And then you basically just have to flash forward till about my senior year of high school, and I'm coming alive spiritually, and pastor friend recommends Desiring God by John Piper. And I recognized that name. C.S. Lewis. I think he wrote some kids' books that I really loved.
Because within the first chapter of Desiring God, I think John Piper,
I mean, basically, so then I got this sort of like Lewisian philosophy as interpreted by John Piper, very foundational to Desiring God. Yeah, I did two things with that book, Desiring God. I went to Jonathan Edwards and I went to C.S. Lewis, and I ended up hanging out more with Jonathan Edwards around then than Lewis. Read Screwtape. I bought like Mere Christianity and the Problem of Pain, but I didn't feel, and part of it was I didn't feel like there was much there for me with Lewis. I'd sort of come to faith kind of philosophically. I mean, there are a lot of things happening, moral, spiritual, sin things going on. And then there was this sort of like Ecclesiastes kind of thing going on in my head of everything is meaningless, and I just wanted the Bible. And so I didn't really spend a lot of time with Lewis then. But I did end up reading Screwtape Letters. And the other thing is that everybody was trying to force C.S. Lewis down my throat, and I just had a sort of natural, visceral reaction to that. I didn't want that. If everybody is trying to give you C.S. Lewis, then I was suspicious. And then over the course of time, I ended up, I read The Abolition of Man. I read a couple things here and there, reflections on the Psalms, I guess some of the more off the beaten path types of things. I mean, I did read the Piper stuff. So what was The Weight of Glory?
Yeah. Weight of Glory, very famous essay. And if you want to understand C.S. Lewis's kind of his whole conception of life and the spiritual journey, a lot of what feeds into Till We Have Faces, Weight of Glory is a good place to start.
Yeah, it is a good place to start, I think. And then I got turned on to the Ransom trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
I said it right.
Mm-hmm. Stephen Baker would be proud.
Yep.
Not the Space trilogy, but the Ransom trilogy.
Right.
What did you think about those books? What did you think about the first one, for example? No, you gotta say it. You gotta tell us.
I'm gonna tell you.
Okay. All right,
I'm gonna tell you.
Okay.
Exactly what I thought about it. I thought it was fine.
Okay.
It's okay. I enjoyed it the first read. Second read, not so much. I'm not gonna do it. Okay, maybe I'll do it.
I think you have to do it. What about Paralandra? How'd you like that one?
I don't know. Out of This World, maybe.
No, I don't. Was Paralandra? No, we're not there yet.
Yes, because you have to go beyond the world, man.
Oh, and then what about that hideous strength?
If Paralandra was out of this world, then that hideous strength was out of this galaxy.
Out of this galaxy, Brandon.
Oh man,
one of the great things.
I really enjoyed. Yeah, one of the greatest things I've ever written. in my life.
If you don't know the story, what's the word for when you sadistically...
He doxed me.
Yeah, I doxed Jake, and I found some dorky thing that he wrote many years ago where it was like, if you enjoyed Paralander was okay, but that hideous strength is out of this galaxy. And I've been making fun of Jake ever since for...
True. I think I haven't read Paralandra, I don't know, 10 years, but I really enjoyed it the first go around. I found the central conceit of Paralandra to be pretty compelling, and I stayed up and read through the night to finish.
Really?
Yeah, I did. I think what he did for me was, he gave me the real drama of the garden. It worked. It's the fall of man. It's why we are where we are. Here was him conceiving of a do-over, not a do-over, but there it is again happening on another planet. Can it be stopped? And if it's going to be stopped, how could it be stopped? And I found it compelling. But then that hideous strength was way better. And I may find, if I went back to Paralandra, maybe I'd find it boring. I don't know. But yeah, reread the Narnia books several times.
As an adult as well, to your kids? And that
yeah, to my even for fun, once for fun, just by myself, just to see if they still held up.
I'd like to do that on the show one of these days. It wasn't on our book list for this year, but it'd be fun to go through at least one or two of those and see how
we should totally do that.
One of the most readable things to a kid.
Narnia.
Yeah. And then you just sort of, my baggage about Lewis then... Yeah, I learned to love Lewis and be really appreciative of him. And despite, the things that make you uncomfortable about him, the way that he can fire the imagination and snap you out of your cold realism or whatever it is, it's a real gift. But the 20th century, early 21st century evangelical love fest with C.S. Lewis is just really grating and really yucky. So I bring a lot of, I think, just plain loathing and hatred for that. And not just like in that everybody has to make the C.S. Lewis the greatest thing ever, but everybody's got to try to be him and everybody's looking for like the next great C.S. Lewis and going to try to do, we frequently
make fun of him. I think we do Chesterton more because in our circles, that's the more obnoxious go-to for a lot of people. But on the Bookening, I'm sure if you listen to the whole series of 70 Bookening episodes or whatever it is we're up to, you've probably heard us make, that guy was just trying to be C.S. Lewis, or nice job being C.S. Lewis kid, or just make snide little comments because everybody wants to be the next C.S. Lewis.
Yep.
And he was good.
Yeah, and he's really great, and you have to be careful there's a reason why people fanboy over him. And
we all got to do an exercise where we went sentence by sentence through Weight of Glory and saw how artful he is.
Yeah, he is a true genius. There's no question about it.
He's masterful.
And worth your time, worth reading and engaging with him. But just the same, so when I came to this book, this is a book I had never read before. I, for a long time, don't think I knew that it was a novel. I think I might have seen the title and thought it might have just been a cute name for an essay or a work of nonfiction or something like that. And then when I found out it was a novel, I was wondering, is this going to be like The Great Divorce or something like that? So I didn't know what to expect coming in.
Yeah.
Realized what it was, and then I did a little bit of quick reading about the Cupid and Psyche myth, discovered that there's a proper pronunciation of Orwell, which is her name.
Orwell? Is that how you say it?
Orwell.
Orwell.
Like just the W.
Orwell.
Like or from the ground and wall. Is that like Pink Floyd's The Wall? Orwell.
Like Norwal, but without the N.
Yep. Exactly.
That's what I thought of too. So yeah, that's my baggage. I don't know if you want to probe that.
I do, but I'll give mine. We can kind of do it, and then we can do a little probing. My baggage, I also grew up with Narnia. My mom read them aloud, and I sort of resented it at the time because I was a brat, as I've described many times. And I've always, much like the great Professor Tolkien, I'm a little great like that, in that we both have an aversion to allegory. I take that back. I like it when Jesus does it. But when C.S. Lewis does it, not so much. I like a lot of things about Narnia, and I've always enjoyed Narnia. And I remember, if I could kind of get over my why is mom reading us a boring book of it all, I did actually like Narnia as a kid, and I've come to really appreciate it. But the things that have stuck with me about it have always kind of incidental wise things. He's not a tame lion. That's something that I think about in reference to God's work in my life all the time. But
that's something I cringe at every time I hear it because it's so overused. But
it is
overused.
It is totally overused and blah blah blah. Hackneyed, people are dumb. Get some new references, people. I agree, but it's the reason it's overused because it's pretty good. And there's I can't think of any of them right now, but there must be 10 or 15 things from C.S. Lewis that are just like little thought benchmarks in my life that just go-tos as far, little metaphors that he's given me for thinking about things. The one that actually always comes back to me is anytime I'm tempted by sin, I think about the way that Diggory, I want to say, is tempted by sin, where if I don't ring this bell in Charn, then I'll always wonder what would happen if I would have rang the bell. That's just so indicative of my life as a sinner. If I don't do this right now, then I'll just always be oppressed by the fact that I didn't do it. So I better just do it, and then I can repent later or something. So C.S. Lewis had my number there, and I've always appreciated that. I don't remember what order I discovered C.S. Lewis in. You can hear my space trilogy, I'm just going to call it the space trilogy. You can hear my space trilogy, because I think that's about what it deserves. You can hear my space trilogy baggage and hear me get Stephen Baker's goat a little bit, because I don't really like the first two of those books all that much, or I've never even been able to read them because they're so boring. But I'm told Paralando would be quite good if I would just give myself to it, but I've never been able to, and I really have tried with both those books. But I love C.S. Lewis's nonfiction. I love Mere Christianity. There's some really problematic stuff in Mere Christianity, not going to pretend like it's all perfect, but what I particularly like about it, and the reason I've gone back to it over the years, is not because of any great spiritual wisdom or insight, but just because I like C.S. Lewis's writing. I have always appreciated, and The Abolition of Man's a great essay with a lot of wisdom, but one of the principal things I like about that essay is just simply how it's written, the metaphors that he chooses, the way he builds his point. It's just like some of the most pleasurable writing to read as writing, up there with E.B. White. E.B. White's the only person I can think of in the 20th century that I'd say even comes close to just being, I just like to read this guy. He could be talking about anything. I don't care. It's just
enjoyable, fun, compelling, funny.
Yeah. But not overwhelming about it. Like Chesterton's funny and great, but also he's like doing cartwheels and standing on his head.
Yeah,
and
this is more just, for it. I think good humored might be the better way to.
Yeah, he's good humored and he can be really funny, but it's just the way his essays build and the clean, crisp writing, the way that it looks on the page, the length of the paragraphs, just everything about it is sexy. He's just one of those 20th century writers that just got it. Like it's the perfect synthesis of everything that came before, all the Victorian stuff leading up to him, and then everything that E.B. White and Hemingway and all those people would do to strip the language down. C.S. Lewis is right at the pleasure center where he's got a really nice old school style combined with just like, it's just pure. I love his style. I love his style. And I understand why people try and rip it off. And I can actually be more forgiving of people trying to rip it off than I can of Chesterton, because C.S. Lewis looks like he'd be a lot easier to rip off because he's not doing calisthenics like Chesterton is. He's not showing off like Chesterton is. It's just really well-constructed writing. And so people think, that's easy. There's no... It's not
because
flashy.
it reads easy, it probably writes easy.
It's almost impossible. It's almost impossible. What C.S. Lewis does is so... And it must have taken... It's so well-crafted, it must have taken forever for him to write anything. I'd be very impressed and it just reads like all great art. It just looks easy. It looks like he just sat down and wrote a stream of consciousness and just kind of casually, you feel like an old friend is talking to you. But the way that his points build, you should read The Weight of Glory. You should read The Abolition of Man. Those are probably the best examples of this. Especially The Weight of Glory goes to some weird places, but the way it gets there is just, he's a beautiful, beautiful writer. I think an underrated fiction writer too. I like the way that his books, we didn't get to talk about this on the Hideous Strength that much, but I just like the way that book is constructed. I like a lot of the descriptive passages. Same thing for Till We Have Faces. He doesn't give you a lot of description. You don't really know what Glome is like exactly, but you know enough. And the things that you do know are evocative. The smell of the priest, for example, Until We Have Faces is just like, how much holy incense have I smelled over my life? And who's ever thought to put that in a book? Nobody that I've read, just the fact that a smell would cling to this guy. That's just one random example that occurs to me.
Mingled with blood and death.
Mingled with blood and death. And you can just smell it. I mean, you know exactly. It's a butcher's shop crossed with a farm, crossed with an Indian bazaar somewhere. It's gross and it's overpowering, and there's something beautiful and spicy in there too. And it's just like, it's perfect. It's perfect. So C.S. Lewis, I can think of very few, if any, 20th century writers that I'd say were his peers, and they'd be people like E.B. White or people that are just known for the beauty of their style. So I didn't mean to actually go off on that. I don't know if that even counts as baggage. But that's the thing that I appreciate about C.S. Lewis the most. And that's the reason that I always want to cut him some slack with his weird spiritual universalism crap, mystical crap. I hate walking into a Christian bookstore. Just you can put a period at the end of that sentence. I just hate to walk into a Christian bookstore because most of them are lame and full of pastel colors and bad books, and I don't know that I've ever really been in a good one. Sorry, good Christian booksellers, if you're listening, but there's a lot of bad Christian. But every Christian bookstore I've ever walked into is lame and terrible and has a bunch of terrible books, and then has a giant shelf dedicated to C.S. Lewis, and it's got every single possible book by C.S. Lewis and compilations of C.S. Lewis, and it's just like, it's obviously a money-making machine, and it's pretty off-putting. And it's pretty off-putting to think that a gullible public would buy all these books that are like scrapped together. It's not as bad as some of the stuff that Christopher Tolkien did with Tolkien, taking every napkin that Tolkien scribbled on and making an opus out of it. But I know there are people that are arguing for it. I don't really know. Maybe Christopher Tolkien honored his father's legacy. Maybe he didn't. I don't really know enough about that one. But in both cases, it's just kind of off-putting to see how much money has been made by the rights holders to these guys, and how gullible people have been about, seemingly gullible, I'll say, about, here's money, thanks for issuing another edition of this or that. Mm-hmm. So I find that whole aspect of C.S. Lewis super obnoxious, but I don't want to judge the guy. It's not that's not really his fault, I guess. I don't know.
Probably not.
What?
Probably not.
Probably not. I don't know. He's awfully weird. If you want to read the worst thing that C.S. Lewis ever wrote, I'd say it's his Reflections on the Psalms, which I just think is super ungodly and unhelpful. A lot of it, actually. Although maybe Jake will remember there might be some really good passages.
Yeah, there's something on the nature of praise where he talks about. I think all you really need to read from Reflections on the Psalm is what Piper quotes, if this is the same passage I'm thinking of. But he talks about how he'd once thought of God's commands to praise him as like an old woman, vain and desiring glory. And he has this like, quote, "Wretch, what is his glory?" Like, it was the blasphemous way that he thought about God. And then he realized one day that the whole world rang with praise. Lovers praising their mistresses, or people praising and then he realized that praise is just the consummation of joy. Mm-hmm. It's when you see something that you love and enjoy, you can't help but praise it. It's just what you do. And you want other people to share in that joy, and you want the objects of your love and joy to know that they bring you joy.
And you haven't actually experienced the joy fully. You haven't.
Yeah. It's not fully. He uses the word consummation. It's not consummated. It's not fully experienced until it's expressed in praise. Mm-hmm. And then he realized, when God commands us to praise him, he's only commanding us to fully enjoy him for all that he is.
And there you have John Piper's entire career encapsulated in one.
That's in one very small passage from Reflections on the Psalm. That one idea,
that's right.
He's built his life and ministry around that idea,
and tremendously helped me and thousands of other people. Not trying to be snide about John Piper.
Yeah, I wasn't. It was very helpful to me.
I thought I was the one that might have sounded like it. I wasn't accusing you. John Piper's entire ministry summed up in that one thought that no. John Piper's built a good ministry on that one thought of C.S. Lewis's, but that's neither here or there. What's your baggage, Brandon?
Man, you guys have pretty much covered it all. It sounds like kind of a strange relationship with C.S. Lewis. I liked some of the same stuff he liked, as we saw, but I didn't necessarily fall in love with Lewis ever. I liked his essays quite a bit. We didn't read The Chronicles of Narnia as a kid. We may have read The Horse and His Boy. I remember that one vaguely. But I think some of the first stuff I read by him was the Ransom trilogy, Space trilogy. I'll just say both. Mm-hmm. I thought it was fine. I never was a sci-fi fan. I liked Dickens and I liked Tolstoy. So Lewis's fiction never really did it for me. I liked Fantasties, so some of his fiction I liked too. So The Great Divorce was fine. I never was a big fan of the Screw Tape Letters, if I had to be honest.
Really?
Yeah. I like them now, but not as a teenager.
I'll tell you which one I don't like is that Great Divorce.
The Great Divorce is bad. I don't want to see
It's
Great
like
Divorce.
a 1-star out of book. I don't like
yeah,
that
so
at
that's
all.
what he always seemed like to me, was that he had an idea, a philosophical idea that he wanted to turn into like a fancy. It was a fiction. And so he would play around with ideas in fiction. And that was fine for me, but what I really wanted in fiction was like what Tolstoy and Dickens did with fiction. And so I think that's the reason C.S. Lewis never really came onto my radar. It was like G.K. Chesterton. I like G.K. Chesterton's fiction just fine. But all these guys, I wasn't really wanting to read their prose. I was wanting to read their prose. I wasn't wanting to read their essays.
Right.
I didn't get into that until later. Then I did come across God in the Docks, which is a collection of C.S. Lewis's essays. And then as I got into English studies, I was reading some of his books on literature, which are really fantastic. And I think that is where C.S. Lewis is best, is when he's writing about the stuff he really knew about and you know that he loves. And so, like you said, we mentioned it now, preface on Paradise Lost. That was really influential for me. So I loved that book. His fiction and his prose, I wanted to be able to write like him, really admired him, especially with his, like when I read The Abolition of Man, stuff like that. I wanted to be able to write essays like he could. But his fiction, never quite did it for me. Though I liked it just fine. But it wouldn't actually be until probably the last time we read That Hideous Strength that I actually really appreciated That Hideous Strength. It was my least favorite for a long time of the three. So and I think it's just because I never liked science fiction. I didn't like H.G. Wells. I never have liked H.G. Wells.
Yeah, me neither.
Or Jules Verne or any of those guys like that. That just wasn't what I was into. And so Paralandra I like just fine. I like the Arthurian romance and all that weird stuff that goes along with that. Big fan of W.B. Yeats. But I always felt like somebody was doing it better.
Yeah.
I made a face like, sorry for saying that. But that's
face.
kind of always how I felt about Lewis, was that when it came to fiction, somebody was always doing it better. Same way with G.K. Chesterton. I always felt like when it came to fiction, somebody was doing it better, even though they were fun to read. But when it came to prose, they were both, or I keep saying prose, when it came to essays, they were both fantastic. They couldn't be beat at that game.
That's a good way actually to put, that helps me put my finger on how I think I felt about a lot of his fiction as a kid. It's like, yeah, Narnia is fine, I guess, but Tolkien, he's already done this, and it's
The Hobbit.
Why would I not read The Hobbit, and why would I not then read Lord of the Rings, which is the best thing ever, and Narnia is only going to ever do 1/1000th of what that does.
Part of why I think that's you see that, and you that's not the only place you see that thing happening. There's a difference between people who have something to say and people who have a story to tell.
Yeah.
These guys Lewis and Chesterton are guys who have things to say.
That's right.
And they're going to say them as essays, and then they're going to use stories to say what they want to say.
That Hideous Strength is nakedly The Abolition of Man.
He
the
actually
nonfiction
says
of the book. Yeah.
so explicitly. It was he realized that the abolition of man was going to be hard for people and dense, and he wanted to dress it up in fiction and say it a different way so that it could be said.
Yeah, that's right.
And heard. And when it comes to people who just have something to say and are going to use fiction to do it, Lewis is one of the best at it.
I never resented him the way I was like, hey, Chesterton's fiction, But Lewis's fiction, always nice. He dresses it up nicely that it does work as a story for the most part.
Yeah, but there's a real difference, and you can feel that difference is felt whether you see it or not. You feel the difference between somebody who has something to say and somebody who has a story to tell.
That's right.
Lewis is very economical in how he says what he wants to say, even in his fiction, I think. But maybe if there's a bit of fiction in Lewis where he just has a story to tell, it might be Till We Have Faces.
It gets close, and then that ending.
It's the
but then he still has the thing to say. He's still doing it all because he has a thing to say.
It's the most cohesive of his books, I think. It's the one that finds the closest synthesis between having a story to tell and a thing to say being the same thing.
Yeah.
That Hideous Strength to me just feels like a wonderful cartoonish smorgasbord of all kinds of things that he wanted to say and all kinds of little stories that he wanted to tell. And it's just like a comic book, and it's fun, and it's wise in different places, and it's prophetic in different, and it's just it's a thing. It's not, I don't even know that it holds together as much of a book, but it's just it's got a grab bag of all kinds of cool stuff that I like and that's helpful. Till We Have Faces is a novel. And pretty good one.
Yeah, but it still has that allegory in it. So.
Yeah.
And that is, somebody mentioned it earlier, allegory.
But
That Tolkien, and Tolkien hated that about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you see the difference. Like, Lord of the Rings is not an allegory, as much as people want to make it an allegory.
No, that is the key difference between those two. Is Tolkien had a story to tell.
Yeah.
And he resented Lewis for letting his thing whatever thing he wanted to say get in the way of the story he wanted to tell.
And so people listening should just know that I'm always going to sympathize more with Tolkien than Lewis here.
And I would go so far as to say I've learned more from spending time with Tolkien's characters, some of whom are very wise and godly in a weird way, than I have from C.S. Lewis clunking me over the head with whatever point he wanted to make. Just spending an afternoon with Gandalf has been worth more to me than C.S. Lewis stringing together a bunch of beautiful platitudes and images. That might be slightly hyperbole, but I don't think much.
Yeah, I'm not going to go that far, but I think the way that I would put it for me is I'm glad Lewis wrote his fiction because I don't know that I would know who he was, that maybe we would know who he was if he hadn't written some children's hits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm really grateful for the very simple things that have stuck with me and been helpful to me in how I think about God, about praise, about, just little things like that. Pretty much a lot of the things that, John Piper latched onto, but some other bigger picture things, especially the abolition of man.
I guess we should talk about Till We Have Faces, huh, guys?
I guess so.
Cue the music. Hey, the Bookening today was written and produced by me, Jake and Brandon and me were all here. I don't feel like saying anything else. See you next week.
What was that about?
What?
What's that about?
You think they deserve a good... Okay, you're right. They deserve a good outro. Hey, everybody. You've heard it a billion times. It's me. It was Jake. It was Brandon. Warhornmedia.com. Patreon.com/The Bookening.
Give that money.
Give that money. See, we're into January. Hopefully, everybody gave lots of end-of-year donations to Warhorn Media. Is there anything that we need to be plugging, Jake? Anything we want to tell the fine folks about?
Our Pastors Conference is coming up on us soon here, February 21st through 23rd. Here in Bloomington, Indiana. So if you're a pastor who listens to the Bookening, you should come.
And why wouldn't you be?
The title of the conference is The Good Fight, Conflict in Christian Ministry, featuring Tim Bailey, Toby Sumter, Max Carell. And so registration's now live at warhornmedia.com.
Hey, yeah, that's true. If everything has happened according to plan, we have about 5,000 podcasts out now, and you should listen to all of them.
That's right.
How would you even have time?
I don't know.
We just launched a new one, or relaunched a new one called Practical Ecclesiology.
That's right.
Hosted by Michael Foster, a PCA minister down in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm. It's all about ecclesiology done practical style.
Good friend of all of ours.
Yeah. Good guy.
And I make an appearance on the first episode, I think.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. We can always cut this part out if you don't.
That's right.
Yeah, Jake, it's fantastic, and everyone should listen to it, right?
Thanks, Nathan.
You're welcome. Hey, everybody, thanks for listening. We'll be back next week to talk about our favorite novel of all time, Till We Have Faces. What were you going to say, Brendan? Peace. War and Peace, yes.